Over the past several years, the Supreme Court of the United States has quietly reshaped the legal foundation of gun laws in America. While many people expect sweeping changes to come from Congress, the reality is that some of the most significant shifts in firearm policy are happening through court rulings, especially at the highest level. These decisions are not always announced as dramatic reversals. Instead, they change how laws are evaluated, enforced, and defended. As a result, gun laws across the country are being rewritten, narrowed, blocked, or upheld based on new constitutional standards. This video breaks down 10 major gun law changes and legal shifts driven by Supreme Court decisions, what they mean in practice, and why their impact is being felt right now. Everything begins with the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. This ruling fundamentally changed how courts review gun laws. Before Bruin, judges relied on a balancing approach, weighing public safety concerns against Second Amendment rights. Courts routinely upheld gun regulations by arguing that the government's interest outweighed individual rights. After Bruin, that framework was abandoned. Under the new standard, governments must show that a modern gun law is consistent with the historical tradition of firearm regulation at the time of the founding. If there is no historical analog from the late 1700s or early 1800s, the law is presumed unconstitutional. This single change has triggered challenges to hundreds of gun regulations nationwide and forced courts to re-examine laws that had stood for decades. One of the most immediate consequences of this shift was the collapse of so-called May-issue concealed carry systems. For years, states like New York, California, and New Jersey allowed local officials to deny carry permits based on subjective criteria such as proper cause or good moral character. In practice, this meant permits were rarely issued to ordinary citizens. After Bruin, those systems were ruled unconstitutional. States were required to adopt objective standards that treat the right to carry a firearm as a right, not a privilege. While some states responded by creating new permitting requirements, discretionary denial is no longer allowed under Supreme Court precedent. In response to these losses, several states attempted a different approach by dramatically expanding the number of places where carrying a firearm would be illegal. Lawmakers labeled public transportation systems, parks, entertainment districts, and even entire neighborhoods as sensitive places. The intent was clear: restrict carry without explicitly banning it. Courts have since pushed back. Judges have ruled that while certain locations may qualify as sensitive, states cannot declare vast portions of public life off limits to firearms. Doing so would undermine the very right the Supreme Court recognized. As a result, multiple sensitive place laws have been blocked, narrowed, or sent back for revision, and litigation on this issue is ongoing. The Supreme Court has also clarified how firearm prohibitions apply to specific categories of people. In United States versus Rahimi, the court examined whether individuals subject to domestic violence restraining orders could be barred from possessing firearms. The court ruled that such restrictions can be constitutional, but only if they align with historical precedent. This decision rejected blanket bans while confirming that targeted restrictions may still survive under the new legal framework. This ruling now shapes how courts evaluate prohibited person laws across the country and sets boundaries for future firearm restrictions tied to personal conduct. Another significant development involves so-called ghost guns and unfinished firearm components. The Supreme Court allowed federal regulations covering certain unfinished frames and receivers to remain in effect. While the ruling did not outlaw homemade firearms, it upheld the government's authority to regulate specific gun kits under existing law. This decision confirmed limits on the ATF's regulatory power while reinforcing Congress's ability to define what constitutes a firearm under federal statute. Although the Supreme Court has not yet issued a direct ruling on assault weapon bans, its recent decisions have placed those laws under increasing pressure. Lower courts are deeply divided. Some have upheld bans on rifles like the AR-15, while others have struck them down, finding no historical justification for prohibiting commonly owned firearms. Several Supreme Court justices have openly signaled that this issue is likely to reach the court in the near future. If that happens, the decision could reshape gun laws nationwide. Magazine capacity limits are facing similar scrutiny. Courts applying the Bruin standard have questioned whether limits on magazine size have any historical counterpart. Without evidence of similar restrictions during the founding era, these laws struggled to survive constitutional review. As legal challenges continue, magazine bans have become one of the most vulnerable categories of modern gun regulation. Another less visible but important shift involves permitting fees, training requirements, and administrative delays. Courts are increasingly ruling that excessive costs or long processing times can amount to unconstitutional burdens on a fundamental right. While states may regulate carry permits, they cannot use bureaucracy to effectively block lawful gun ownership. This has forced several jurisdictions to revise their permitting systems and eliminate requirements that courts view as punitive or obstructive. At the same time, an unusual legal development has emerged. The federal government has begun suing local governments over restrictive gun laws, arguing that certain permitting schemes and firearm bans violate constitutional standards set by the Supreme Court. These lawsuits highlight a growing conflict between local enforcement strategies and federal interpretations of the Second Amendment, signaling a shift in how gun laws are challenged in court. Looking ahead, several major firearm issues are likely to reach the Supreme Court. These include assault weapon bans, magazine limits, interstate carry reciprocity, and expanded definitions of prohibited persons. Rather than issuing sweeping rulings all at once, the court appears to be refining gun law boundaries gradually, case by case. Each decision builds on the last, slowly reshaping how firearm regulations are written and enforced across the country. Gun laws in America are not changing overnight. They are evolving through judicial decisions that redefine how regulations must be justified under the Constitution. Understanding these shifts is essential for anyone following Second Amendment law, public policy, or constitutional rights. As courts continue to apply Supreme Court precedent, the landscape of gun regulation will keep changing, often quietly, but with lasting consequences. This has been 2 of Freedom.